Sarah Morgan stood before her classroom of 8th graders, maintaining her composure as her phone vibrated insistently in her desk drawer. 3 missed calls from Mr. Henderson, their neighbor, in the past hour. She knew what he wanted, the same thing he'd been demanding for the past 2 weeks since her mother Clara's funeral. Money. A debt she hadn't known existed until she found the handwritten IOU while clearing out her mother's belongings. Remember to cite your sources in your essays, she reminded her students as the final bell rang. I want to see those drafts on Monday. Her voice remained steady, masking the tremor in her hands as she gathered her materials. The autumn sunlight streaming through the classroom windows did nothing to warm the chill that had settled in her chest. The familiar scent of chalk dust and notebook paper that usually brought her comfort now felt suffocating. 2 weeks ago, her life had made sense. She'd been the devoted daughter who'd supported her mother through Dad's extended medical treatments in Arizona. The dedicated teacher who'd donated her savings to help with the mounting bills. The woman who thought she understood sacrifice and family loyalty. Now, everything she thought she knew was unraveling like a poorly knitted sweater. Her phone buzzed again as she walked to her car. Mr. Henderson's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a text message, "We need to talk about your mother's debt. $175,000 is not something I can ignore. Don't make me take this further." Sarah's hands shook as she unlocked her car. The amount still shocked her, even after seeing it written in her mother's familiar handwriting. How had Clara managed to borrow so much? And why hadn't she mentioned it during those long nights they'd spent together, planning Dad's treatment strategy? The drive home felt like moving through molasses. Each traffic light gave her time to spiral deeper into anxiety. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, "Your father's getting the best care possible, sweetheart. Don't worry about the money. I've handled everything." Everything, it seemed, except telling the truth. Sarah pulled into her driveway, her headlights illuminating Mr. Henderson's imposing figure waiting on her porch. At 65, he carried himself with the authority of someone used to getting his way. His perfectly pressed slacks and crisp button-down shirt projected an image of respectability that contrasted sharply with the predatory gleam in his eyes. "Miss Morgan," he called out as she emerged from her car. "I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your obligations. Mr. Henderson, I've told you, I need time to figure this out. Mom just died, and I'm still trying to understand Dash." "Understanding isn't payment," he cut her off, his voice carrying across the darkness. "Your mother borrowed that money for your father's treatment. As her heir, the debt falls to you. Unless, of course, you prefer I share some interesting details about your family's financial arrangements with the school board." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's just say your mother was creative with her bookkeeping. The kind of creativity that raises questions about where money really went. Questions that could make people wonder about your own financial integrity." The threat hung in the air between them. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. Her teaching career, her reputation in the community, everything she'd worked for, all balanced on the edge of this man's mercy. "I'll give you until the end of the month," Mr. Henderson said, stepping off her porch. "After that, well." He shrugged, leaving the consequence unspoken. Sarah waited until his footsteps faded before unlocking her front door. Her hands trembled so badly she dropped her keys twice. Inside, the house felt different, haunted not by her mother's death, but by the secrets that were beginning to surface. She made her way to her home office, where boxes of Clara's papers still waited to be sorted. The IOU sat atop one stack, but something about the other documents had been nagging at her. Bank statements. Credit card bills. A pattern she couldn't quite piece together. Sarah pulled out her laptop and began organizing the statements chronologically. As midnight approached, her eyes caught on a series of regular transfers, $3,000 every month for the past 3 years, sent to an account she didn't recognize. The name on the transfers wasn't her father's doctor. It wasn't a medical facility at all. It was a woman's name, Angela Martinez. Sarah stared at the screen, her world tilting on its axis. The treatments in Arizona. The mounting bills. Her mother's quiet acceptance of it all. A horrible suspicion began to take root in her mind. What if her father hadn't been getting treatment at all? The question hung in the air like smoke, choking her with possibilities she wasn't ready to face. Sarah reached for her phone, her finger hovering over her father's number. But before she could press dial, a new email notification popped up. From Angela Martinez. Subject: We need to talk about Richard. Sarah's hand shook as she opened the message, her mother's careful lies crumbling around her like autumn leaves in a storm. The truth, she was beginning to realize, would cost far more than $175,000. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened Angela Martinez's email, the blue light of her laptop screen casting shadows across her mother's carefully organized financial records. The message was brief, but each word felt like a hammer striking at the foundation of her world. I know this isn't the best timing with Clara's passing, but we need to discuss Richard's obligations. My son deserves to know his father. Call me when you're ready to talk. I'm sorry you had to find out this way. A son. The words echoed in Sarah's mind as pieces of a puzzle she never knew she was solving clicked into place. The monthly transfers. Her father's extended absences. Her mother's quiet resignation in those final months. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in like the pages of a book she never wanted to read. Sarah stumbled to her feet, knocking over a stack of bank statements. As they scattered across the floor, a small key fell from between the papers, its brass surface dulled with age. She recognized it immediately, the key to her mother's personal safe deposit box at Riverside Bank. Clara had mentioned it once, saying it contained important papers she might need someday. Sarah had assumed they were insurance documents or perhaps old family photographs. Now she wondered what other secrets that small metal box might hold. The next morning, Sarah called in sick to work for the first time in her teaching career. The drive to Riverside Bank felt surreal, as if she were watching someone else navigate the morning traffic. Her mother's voice played in her head, a constant loop of half-truths and careful omissions that now felt like betrayals. Ms. Morgan, the bank manager, greeted her warmly. We were so sorry to hear about your mother. She was always such a lovely customer. Sarah managed a weak smile as she followed him to the vault. The key slid into the lock with a smoothness that suggested frequent use. Inside the box, she found several manila envelopes, each labeled in her mother's precise handwriting. The first contained what appeared to be surveillance photos, her father entering an apartment building, holding hands with a woman Sarah didn't recognize, carrying shopping bags into what was clearly a residential neighborhood in Phoenix. The timestamp showed a pattern spanning 3 years, all during his supposed treatment periods. The second envelope held printed emails between her father and Angela, dating back 5 years. Their casual intimacy felt like a physical blow. They discussed everyday things, grocery lists, weekend plans, complaints about work, interwoven with declarations of love and shared dreams. But it was the third envelope that brought Sarah to her knees. Inside was a handwritten letter from her mother, dated just 2 weeks before her death. My dearest Sarah. If you're reading this, it means I couldn't find the courage to tell you the truth while I was alive. The coward's way out, perhaps, but mothers sometimes make terrible choices trying to protect their children. Your father isn't in Arizona for cancer treatment. He never was. The money I borrowed from James Henderson wasn't for medical bills, it was to keep your father's other life from destroying yours. Angela threatened to go public, to expose everything. She wanted security for her son, your brother, Sarah. He's 15 now, just starting high school. Your father refuses to acknowledge him, but I couldn't bear the thought of a child suffering for our sins. The monthly payments were my attempt to buy silence, to preserve your father's reputation and protect your career at the school. James helped arrange everything, but his help came with a price I fear you'll now have to pay. I'm sorry, my darling girl. I thought I was protecting our family, but perhaps I was only protecting lies that should have been exposed long ago. You deserved better than the web of deception I helped weave. The choice of what to do with this truth is now yours. Know that whatever you decide, my love for you was never a lie. Forever your mother. Clara. Sarah sat in the bank's private viewing room for a long time, her mother's last words blurring through her tears. The carefully constructed narrative of her family life, her father's brave battle with illness, her mother's stoic support, her own role as the dutiful daughter, crumbled like a sandcastle at high tide. Her phone buzzed. A text from her father, coming home early. Good news about the treatment. Dinner tonight? Another buzz. Mr. Henderson, time's running out, Miss Morgan. Decisions have consequences. Sarah looked at the scattered evidence of her family's dissolution, the photos, the emails, her mother's confession. A strange calm settled over her, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to lose but everything left to fight for. She pulled out her phone and typed a reply to Angela Martinez, tomorrow. 2 p.m. Send me the address. Then she began carefully photographing every document, every photo, every piece of evidence her mother had collected. Mr. Henderson's threats suddenly felt less like a noose and more like a weapon she could turn against him. Her father's good news tasted like ashes in her mouth. As she left the bank, Sarah caught her reflection in the polished marble walls. The woman staring back at her wasn't just a daughter betrayed or a teacher threatened. She was something new, something forged in the crucible of uncovered truths and shattered illusions. Her mother had tried to protect her by maintaining lies. Sarah would protect herself by exposing the truth, no matter the cost. She just had to decide where to aim the first blow. The kitchen timer chimed softly as Sarah watched her father arrange the takeout containers on their dining room table. Richard Morgan moved with the easy confidence of a man who believed his world was secure, each gesture carrying the weight of unearned authority. The house filled with the aroma of his favorite Chinese restaurant, the same place they'd ordered from during countless family dinners, back when Sarah thought she understood what family meant. The doctors are optimistic, Richard was saying, carefully spooning out portions as if measuring rice could somehow measure truth. The new treatment protocol is showing remarkable results. I might even be able to cut back on the trips to Arizona soon. Sarah studied him, really studied him, for the first time since her mother's death. The healthy glow in his cheeks. The steady hands that should have been weakened by chemotherapy. The careful way he maintained eye contact while speaking lies that had become as natural as breathing. That's interesting, she said quietly, her mother's letter burning in her pocket like a brand. Because I spoke with Dr. Martinez today. The chopsticks in Richard's hands stilled for just a fraction of a second, so brief anyone else might have missed it. But Sarah had spent the afternoon studying her mother's photographs, learning to read the microscopic tells of a skilled deceiver. Oh. His voice remained carefully neutral. One of the specialists? No. Sarah placed her phone on the table between them, screen up, showing one of the surveillance photos. Angela Martinez. Mother of your 15-year-old son. The silence that followed felt like standing in the eye of a hurricane, a moment of terrible stillness before devastation. Richard's face went through a series of minute changes, surprise, fear, calculation, and finally, a practiced concern that made Sarah's stomach turn. Sweetheart, I can explain. Can you explain why Mom borrowed $175,000 from Mr. Henderson to keep your mistress quiet? Sarah's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled beneath the table. Or why she spent the last 3 years of her life paying blackmail while you played house in Phoenix. Your mother. Richard set down his chopsticks with deliberate care. Clara made her own choices. She understood that sometimes marriages evolve, that people have needs. Needs? The word tasted like poison. Was that what you told her when she was dying? When she was carrying the weight of your secrets and Mr. Henderson's threats? Mr. Henderson. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, not guilt, but calculation. What exactly did he tell you? Enough to know that Mom wasn't just covering up your affair. Sarah pulled out copies of the bank statements she'd found. These transfers, they weren't just about Angela and her son, were they? There's more. Something big enough that Mr. Henderson thought he could use it to threaten my career. Richard's practiced facade cracked slightly. Sarah, you need to be very careful about what you do next. There are complications you don't understand. Your mother knew that sometimes it's better to maintain peace than expose ugly truths. Mom's dead, Sarah said flatly. She doesn't have to protect your lies anymore. And neither do I. She stood up, her untouched dinner growing cold between them. The familiar photographs on the walls, family vacations, graduation days, moments she'd once thought were pure, now felt like props in an elaborate theater production. I'm meeting Angela tomorrow, she told him. I'm going to meet my brother. And then I'm going to figure out exactly what kind of complications were worth destroying Mom's life to hide. Don't. For the first time, real fear crept into Richard's voice. Sarah, please. There are things you don't know, things that could hurt a lot of people if they came out. Including you. Sarah thought of her mother in those final days, the weight of secrets etched in the lines around her eyes, the burden of protection that had become its own kind of prison. She thought of a 15-year-old boy growing up without a father, of money-bought silence, of Mr. Henderson's smug threats. You know what hurts, Dad? Finding out that while I was donating my savings for your treatment, you were building a second family. Learning that Mom died protecting your lies instead of fighting her own battles with cancer. Discovering that my whole life has been a carefully constructed fiction. She moved toward the door, then paused. Mom's last letter said she kept quiet to protect me. But I'm not her. I won't sacrifice truth for peace, or justice for appearance. Sarah. Richard stood, reaching for her arm. Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. Please. For your own good. She pulled away from his grasp, the touch of his fingers leaving invisible marks on her skin. My own good? When have you ever cared about that? When you were draining Mom's accounts? When you were letting Mr. Henderson threaten her? Or maybe when you were creating a whole new family while abandoning your existing one? The sound of her father's shaky breath followed her to the door. I loved your mother, he said quietly. In my own way. Sarah turned back one last time, seeing not the powerful father of her childhood but a man diminished by his own deceptions. Love without truth isn't love, Dad. It's just another form of control. As she walked to her car, her phone buzzed with a text from Angela, address sent. Bringing Michael tomorrow. He's nervous but excited to meet his sister. Sarah looked back at the house where she'd grown up, where her mother had died protecting lies, where her father still sat among the ruins of his deceptions. Tomorrow she would meet her brother and begin unraveling the deeper mystery her mother had died protecting. But tonight, in the growing darkness, she allowed herself to mourn, not just for the mother she'd lost, but for the family she'd thought she had, and for the innocent belief in truth that she could never reclaim. The truth, she was learning, was like surgery, painful, necessary, and ultimately healing. But first, you had to be willing to cut deep enough to find it. The coffee shop Angela had chosen sat on the edge of town, its weathered brick exterior and hand-painted windows suggesting a place where secrets could be shared without echoing too loudly. Sarah arrived early, watching through rain-streaked glass as couples and families went about their Saturday routines, their lives untouched by the earthquake about to reshape her world. She recognized Angela instantly when she walked in, not from the surveillance photos, but from something deeper, more intuitive. The same shadow lived in both their eyes, the weight of loving Richard Morgan etched in subtle lines around their mouths. Behind her came Michael, 15 years old but carrying himself with the careful vigilance of someone who had learned too early to read a room. Sarah. Angela's voice was soft but steady, her hands clasped tightly around her purse strap. Thank you for meeting us. Michael hung back slightly, his eyes, so startlingly like Sarah's own, taking in every detail of his half-sister's face. He had their father's height but none of his forceful presence. Instead, there was something gentle in his bearing, something that reminded Sarah painfully of her mother. Please, sit, Sarah managed, gesturing to the empty chairs at her corner table. The distance between them felt both vast and microscopic, years of unknowing collapsing into a single moment. I brought something, Angela said after they'd ordered, sliding a worn leather journal across the table. Your mother gave this to me 6 months ago. She wanted you to have it, but not until you knew everything. Sarah's fingers trembled as she opened the journal. Her mother's familiar handwriting filled the pages, but these weren't the careful letters of grocery lists and birthday cards. These were desperate scratches, thoughts poured out in raw, unfiltered streams. Richard threatened to expose my brother's fraud if I didn't help cover his tracks. James Henderson knows everything, the embezzlement, the offshore accounts, the forged documents. I thought I was protecting Sarah's career, her future. But I'm just another link in this chain of silence. The words blurred as Sarah looked up at Angela. Mom's brother? Uncle David? Angela nodded grimly. Your father discovered that David had been embezzling from his company's pension fund. Instead of turning him in, he used that knowledge as leverage. Over all of us. The money I received, it wasn't just child support. It was hush money, tied to a much bigger fraud. But Mr. Henderson is as deep in it as anyone, Angela finished. He's been helping your father move money through shell companies for years. The debt your mother owed him. It's real, but it's not what you think. It was her way of trying to buy protection for you, using the only currency Henderson respects. Michael spoke for the first time, his voice carrying an echo of wisdom beyond his years. Mom tried to go to the authorities once, when I was 12. That's when your father threatened to implicate your Uncle David. He said he'd make sure both families went down together. Sarah thought of her mother's quiet resignation in those final months, of the careful way she'd organized her evidence, of the protection she'd tried to build even as cancer ate away at her strength. She was trying to give me a weapon, she realized aloud. Something to fight back with. Clara was. Angela's voice caught. She was kind to me, even when she had every reason not to be. She understood what it meant to be trapped by Richard's manipulation. The journal, there's more. Things about Henderson's involvement, about where the money really went. She was building a case, piece by piece. Sarah turned more pages, her mother's investigation unfolding before her eyes. Bank accounts, dates, connections, a web of financial fraud that stretched far beyond a simple story of infidelity in secret families. Why are you showing me this now? She asked Angela. Because your father is planning to sell the company, Michael said quietly. Mom overheard him on the phone. Once that happens, the money will be impossible to trace. All those people who lost their pensions, they'll never get justice. And Henderson is getting nervous, Angela replied. That's why he's pushing so hard about your mother's debt. He needs to ensure your silence before the sale goes through. He doesn't know about the evidence Clara collected. Sarah looked at Michael, this brother she never knew she had, carrying burdens no 15-year-old should bear. She thought of her mother, fighting a private war even as she battled cancer, trying to leave behind the tools for justice. What do you want from me? She asked softly. Angela reached across the table, her fingers stopping just short of Sarah's hand. We want to finish what Clara started. But we can't do it alone. Henderson trusts you, you're the grieving daughter, the respected teacher. He won't see you as a threat until it's too late. It's dangerous, Michael added, his young face serious. If we do this, Dad won't hold back. He'll try to destroy everyone involved. Sarah touched her mother's journal, feeling the weight of years of careful documentation, of silent resistance, of love expressed through meticulous preparation for a battle she wouldn't live to fight. Mom died protecting his secrets, she said quietly. I won't let her sacrifice be for nothing. She looked up at Angela and Michael, seeing not strangers but allies forged in the crucible of Richard Morgan's deceptions. Tell me everything you know about Henderson's connection to the company sale. It's time to finish what Mom started. As they bent their heads together over coffee gone cold, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a transformation from victim to architect of justice. Her mother had left her more than evidence. She'd left her a path to truth, and the courage to walk it. The rain outside had stopped, but thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. Sarah just had to make sure she was ready when it broke. Sarah sat in her classroom after hours, her mother's journal open beside her student essays. The familiar scent of chalk dust and worn textbooks that had once felt suffocating now provided an odd comfort, a reminder that parts of her life remained anchored in truth, even as others dissolved into shadows. Her phone lit up with a text from Michael, Dad's meeting Henderson at the golf club tomorrow. 2 p.m. The past week had transformed her relationship with her half-brother from stranger to confidant. In Michael's quiet resilience, she recognized echoes of their mother, Clara's strength living on in unexpected ways. Their shared wounds had become a bridge, pain transformed into purpose. Sarah's fingers traced her mother's handwriting in the journal, following the careful documentation of years of financial manipulation. Each entry revealed not just facts, but the silent battles Clara had fought, a mother's desperate attempt to protect both her children from the fallout of Richard's choices. You ready for this? Angela's text appeared below Michael's. Sarah thought about the recording device hidden in her purse, about the carefully crafted story she would tell Henderson. Her mother had died protecting secrets, Sarah would live revealing truth. The symmetry felt both painful and right. The plan was elegantly simple in its design, built on Richard's own arrogance and Henderson's greed. Sarah would approach Henderson about restructuring her mother's debt, playing the role of the desperate daughter seeking protection. The recording device would capture their conversation while Michael, from a nearby table, photographed their meeting. But it wasn't the plan that occupied Sarah's thoughts as she gathered her papers. It was the weight of generations of silence she was about to break. Her phone buzzed again, her father this time, we should talk. About your mother's wishes. About family loyalty. Family loyalty. The phrase that had been wielded like a weapon, used to justify secrets in silence. Sarah thought of Michael, growing up without a father's acknowledgement. Of Angela, isolated by shame and threats. Of her mother, dying with the burden of protection heavy on her shoulders. The next afternoon, Sarah walked into the golf club's restaurant with her heart thundering but her step steady. Henderson sat at his usual corner table, his carefully pressed clothes and practiced smile a mask for the predator beneath. Miss Morgan, he greeted her, gesturing to the chair across from him. I'm glad you finally decided to be reasonable about this situation. Sarah settled into the chair, feeling the weight of the recording device in her purse. Through the window, she caught a glimpse of Michael at a distant table, his presence both a comfort and a reminder of what was at stake. Mr. Henderson, she began, her voice carrying just the right note of desperation, I need more time to arrange the money. But I think I found something in Mom's papers that might interest you. His smile never wavered, but something sharp flickered in his eyes. Oh. Bank records, Sarah said softly, watching his reaction. Transfers to offshore accounts. Names I recognize from Dad's company board. The trap was baited with truth, the most dangerous kind of lure. Henderson's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around his water glass. Your mother was confused in her final days, he said carefully. Illness can make people imagine things. These don't seem like imaginings. Sarah reached into her purse, pretending to search for papers while ensuring the recorder had a clear line of sound. Especially the transfers that coincide with the pension fund adjustments. Henderson's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly beneath. Your father assured me that all of Clara's papers had been properly handled. Dad doesn't know about everything Mom left behind, Sarah said, thinking of the safe deposit box, of years of careful documentation. Just like he doesn't know I've met Angela and Michael. The name drops hit their target. Henderson's practiced calm cracked further. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Morgan. Your mother understood the importance of discretion. Of family loyalty. Did she? Sarah leaned forward slightly. Or did she understand fear? The same fear you're using to try to control me now? I'm offering you protection, Henderson's voice dropped lower, threatening. The same protection I offered your mother. Without it, certain information about your uncle's activities might find its way to the authorities. Information that could implicate your entire family. Sarah felt a strange calm settle over her. In her mind, she saw her mother in those final days, not defeated by secrets, but planting seeds of truth that would bloom after she was gone. Protection comes with a price, doesn't it? She asked quietly. The debt. The silence. The compromise of everything we claim to value. Tell me, Mr. Henderson, how many other families are you protecting with threats and manufactured debt? His hand shot across the table, gripping her wrist with bruising force. Don't threaten me, little girl. You have no idea what you're dealing with. Sarah didn't pull away. Instead, she smiled, a small, sad expression that carried echoes of her mother's quiet strength. Actually, I do. Mom made sure of that. And right now, Michael is taking pictures of you assaulting me in public. How would that look to the board members you're trying to convince to approve the company sale? Henderson's hand withdrew as if burned. Over his shoulder, Sarah saw Michael calmly photographing every moment of their interaction. This isn't over, Henderson growled, standing abruptly. No, Sarah agreed, gathering her purse. It's just beginning. Mom died protecting your secrets and Dad's lies. I'm going to live telling the truth. As Henderson stormed out of the restaurant, Sarah stayed seated, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. Her phone lit up with messages from Michael and Angela, confirmation that they had everything they needed. The drive home felt different this time, not an escape, but a victory lap. Sarah thought of her mother's journal, of the evidence carefully preserved, of the strength it took to resist in silence while building a path to justice. Tomorrow, they would take the recordings and photographs to the authorities. Richard's carefully constructed empire of lies would begin to crumble. But tonight, Sarah allowed herself to feel the full weight of her transformation, from a daughter bound by secrets to a woman strong enough to break them. In her rearview mirror, storm clouds gathered on the horizon. But for the first time since her mother's death, Sarah welcomed the coming tempest. After all, sometimes you had to weather the storm to clear the air. The morning sunlight filtered through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor as Sarah sat between Michael and Angela. Her mother's journal rested in her lap, no longer a burden of secrets, but a testament to quiet resistance and enduring love. The headlines had been explosive: corporate fraud exposed, Henderson Financial under investigation. Morgan Industries CEO steps down amid scandal. Pension funds to be restored. But the real story wasn't in the newspapers. It lived in the subtle shifts between people who had been strangers mere weeks ago, now bound together by truth's painful liberation. Sarah watched her father being led away by federal agents, his carefully constructed world of deception crumbling like autumn leaves. He looked smaller somehow, diminished not by handcuffs but by the weight of his own choices finally laid bare. You didn't have to come today, she said softly to Michael, who hadn't left her side through the entire investigation. Her brother, and the word felt right now, earned through shared battles rather than mere blood, offered a slight smile. Family shows up, he said simply. The real kind, not the kind built on lies. Angela reached across Michael to squeeze Sarah's hand. The gesture carried echoes of Clara's touch, of motherly comfort transformed and reborn through unexpected channels. These past weeks had taught Sarah that family could be rebuilt from the ashes of deception, stronger for having faced the truth together. Later that evening, they gathered in Sarah's garden, the same space where Henderson had once threatened her, now reclaimed as a sanctuary. Michael helped her plant new flowers, their hands working together in the soil as Angela prepared dinner inside. The simple domesticity felt like a revelation. "I found something else in Mom's papers," Sarah said, watching Michael pat the earth around a young rosebush. "Letters she wrote to you, every year on your birthday. She never sent them, but she never forgot you either." Michael's hands stilled in the dirt. "She knew about me." "She did more than know." Sarah reached into her pocket, withdrawing a carefully preserved envelope. "She loved you from afar. Protected you the only way she could." Inside was a photograph, Clara at a school play 5 years ago, sitting quietly in the back row. Michael was on stage, playing the lead in Our Town. She had been there, a silent guardian, watching her secret grandchild shine. Tears traced clean lines through the dirt on Michael's cheeks. "I remember that night. I thought I saw someone, but I convinced myself I was imagining things. Mom was good at that, being present without being seen. She documented everything, your academic awards, sports victories, music recitals. She couldn't claim you publicly, but she never stopped being your grandmother." From inside, the sound of Angela's cooking and gentle humming drifted out through open windows. The evening air carried the scent of herbs from Clara's garden, still growing, still offering sustenance even after she was gone. "What happens now?" Michael asked, his voice carrying the uncertainty of a child who had grown up too fast. Sarah looked at the house she'd inherited, not just the physical structure, but the legacy of truth her mother had carefully preserved within its walls. "Now we build something new. Something honest." The investigation had recovered most of the pension funds. Henderson faced years in prison for his role in the fraud. Richard would never again be in a position to manipulate and destroy families. But the real victory wasn't in justice served, it was in the healing that came after. Sarah had used her mother's evidence to protect both Angela and Uncle David, ensuring they were seen as victims rather than accomplices. The truth, she had learned, could be wielded with compassion, used to break cycles of abuse without creating new victims. Inside, Angela called them for dinner. The table was set for 3, a small family rebuilt from the fragments of a larger one's destruction. Sarah touched the empty chair where her mother should have sat, feeling Clara's presence in the peace they'd finally achieved. "Mom knew," she said quietly as they settled around the table. "She knew that someday we'd find each other. Everything she did, the documentation, the evidence, the quiet resistance, it wasn't just about exposing Dad's crimes. It was about making sure we had the chance to become a real family." Michael reached for the salad bowl, his movements careful and deliberate. "Do you think she'd be happy seeing us like this?" Sarah thought of her mother's final letter, of the love that had driven her to protect both her children in whatever ways she could. "I think she's been waiting for this moment since the day she discovered your existence. She just had to trust that we'd be strong enough to handle the truth when it finally came to light." Angela raised her glass in a quiet toast. "To Clara," she said softly. "Who taught us that the strongest love sometimes looks like letting go." To Mom, Sarah and Michael echoed together. As they shared their meal, Sarah felt the weight of secrets finally lifting from her shoulders. Her mother had died protecting a complicated truth, but she had left behind all the tools needed to build something beautiful from its revelation. The evening light painted soft shadows across their faces, 3 people bound not by deception but by choice, by truth, by the courage to face darkness and still choose love. Outside, Clara's roses continued to bloom, their fragrance a reminder that even in gardens watered by tears, beauty finds a way to grow. Sarah looked at her brother, at the woman who had become a friend rather than a rival, at the empty chair that held her mother's memory, and knew that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply telling the truth, no matter the cost. In the end, that truth had set them all free.